Hey there. Hey, thanks so much for joining us as a guide in this summer program for the Summer Bridge program at Oregon City High School. What I want to do in this first video is to kind of walk you through the framework for this experience that we're creating for these rising ninth graders. Now, the Summer Bridge program is a 2-week program, and it will be repeated twice during the month of June. In the first week, we'll be doing what's called a scrambler dig. And in the scrambler dig, the intention there is to really awaken their wonder, awaken that curiosity to be a learner, in the same way that the curiosity and a wonder was awoken for you during your dig. We wanted each of the students to feel that same joy of learning that's personally meaningful and has a clear purpose that is personally relevant. In the second week of each session of the summer program is going to be a challenge dig. And in that challenge dig, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking the students, now that they become awakened in that wonder, to actually focus that wonder on making a difference, actually challenging them to step up as change makers in their own community. And we'll be taking them through that in the second session. So in this first video, what I want to do is kind of just walk through the experience framework for that first scrambler dig. And then later we'll go through the nuances of leading a dig. And then what we'll do is we'll be then turning to the second week and exploring more about what it means to be that challenge dig, in which we're going to be introducing systems thinking. So let's jump in and talk about that first week. So in that first week, there are going to be 7 sessions that we're going to be engaging in digs, in dig work. And each one of those have a very specific role, a very specific intention. But we recognize that during this process, we are going to continually listen to the process unfold, and we will make adaptations as needed. But the framework itself gives us a structure, basically a process framework, that allows us to know, to walk through this journey with some unity together, because there are going to be 4 different teams. Each team is going to be made up of 3 pods. And what's going to happen is that all of the teams will have the same base. And that base is going to be belonging. Within each team, each pod made up of 6 or 7 students will be given a different scrambler. And that pod has a guide. And that pod will then walk into that scrambler, recognizing that that pod itself might form subgroups. There may be 2 or 3 students who want to work together. There may be a student who just wants to work together by themselves. That'll be self-forming at that level, at the pod level. But what's critical is that the guide will lead them, help them through this journey of learning, recognizing the 90% rule, that 90% of this learning is about them, their interests, their curiosity, their wonder, is that we lead them into a wonderland. A place where something will emerge in that place of wonder that'll have real meaning for them. Now, so again, we will adapt this as we go. But I wanted to walk through then kind of the intention of each of those 7 dig sessions in that first week. The first session is about interests. So each pod will have been given their base and scrambler. The guide then needs to allow each of those voices of those 6 or 7 students to be heard and understood and appreciated, and honor each of the stories that come in to that room that they will be in. And so what we're going to be asking the guides to do is to gently be asking each of the students about their interests, and creating then the space for their voice to be heard. And so it's to be curious about what is it that the students are each interested in. This year of COVID has not been a lost year, that the students have learned a lot, but they've learned in ways that may have surprised them, in areas that may have surprised them. We don't know. We're curious. What have they learned? But what are they interested in? And so what the guides are going to be doing is to gently ask each of the students, what are you interested in? And then allow everybody to listen and hear what those voices are, and to be actually then probing. Always probe. Probe once or twice. Because when you probe, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm hearing you, and I'm curious to understand that more deeply. So when they say something, well, what does that mean? Why does that interest you? So always allow yourselves to probe at least once when you hear an interest. Because what you're doing is you're really validating that that interest is something that is worthy of further exploration. And so what we're going to be asking you to do is, as you are going student by student, listening to their interests, use that 4x4-inch Post-it pad that you're going to be given and write that down. Write that interest down. And so sit there and write the interest down and put it, rip it off and put the next one, write the next interest down, and likely you'll have 2 or 3 at least interests that surface. Some students may need some probing. Some students may need some encouraging. They may not feel empowered to actually share what their interests are. Well, everybody has interests, but they just, sometimes you just need to be gently asking and probing what those might be, and what do they do, and what do they do when they're out on, what do they do in the summertime? What do they do in their free time? What do they do? So after each student has had the space to share those interests, then the thought was that you would then just take those 2 or 3 or however interests that get surfaced at that point and hand it to the student and ask them then to put them onto a piece of paper, a butcher black piece of paper that was going to be on the wall in your room, in your pod room, which says interests on the top, interests. And just have them put them up there, randomly. Put up the interests that they've just identified on the wall. Then go to the next student and do the same thing. What are you interested in? Oh, okay. Write it down, hand it to them, put it up on the wall. Go ahead, you put it up on the wall, please. And go through your students that way. What will happen then at the end of that first session is then you're going to have these Post-it pads now on this wall, and they're going to be randomly, chaotically up on that wall. Then what we're going to ask you to do is to take each of those students, take the students up as a group, and walk over to that wall and stand about maybe 3 or 4 feet away from it, and you're all just standing there, and then ask 1 or 2 of the students to step up and look at them and help guide the rest of the group in clustering them. That means to actually say, oh, there is this. These are similar interests, and these are similar interests, and these are similar interests. And start to see where there may be similar interests on that amongst those Post-it pads that have been put up there. And then once those interests have been clustered that way, label them. What do we call that? What do we call that interest? And so go ahead and draw a circle around that group of interest cards and label it. Oh, this is that interest. Oh, that's that interest. And so that the group itself together, and they would do this jointly, and they're helped by the 2 students who are up there doing it, so it's a collective process. But they begin to sit back and say, okay, there are these 2 or 3 interests that really are shared, are bonding this group together. Okay, got it. So that's the first step. That's what happens during session 1. Is we surface the interests and we begin to name them as we name the clusters. And it's also really important to acknowledge and validate those that are not even in the cluster. You may find students who have an interest that is that's surprising for you. That's quite honestly surprising. name that. Ooh, look at this, look at that. There's an interest here. That, and so that's kind of what you want to do in the first session, is to go in and surface what it is that is the shared interests as well as the individual interests, and to really validate each one of those as being important and worthy of further exploration.